going back to Tortoise and Hare, so you said earlier that DreamWorks knew that it was gonna fall apart, but people at Aardman did not. So what stage was it at in the entire process that they realized it wasn't gonna work, and why did they realize? Was it the story? Was it the budget?
Well, I can't speak to budget, I was literally sort of. I remember hmm, Lippman or useless somebody telling me that I was going to be assigned, taken off what I was doing,
Yeah.
whether that was Madagascar or Sinbad or Spirit, whatever it was, and get sent to the UK. And I think one of the reasons that they thought I might help was because even though I was living in America and had been for a while, I obviously came from England, and I think there was definitely a them and us kind of thing
Of
happening.
course.
Aardman, Aardman you know, had always been its own kind of self-contained little world, and then it had done this deal with DreamWorks for three pictures, and the second one had been very successful. Um, but I think there was this sort of resentment of the Americans, being in their world and coming in with their way of doing things versus the Aardman way of doing things. Um, and so there was some lack of communication going on there. And apart from whatever I might have been able to contribute to helping the story, I think they possibly thought, well, maybe John's got a foot in both worlds. He comes from the UK. He understands the English,
Mm,
but not just an English sense of humour, but maybe a sort of a lower register passive aggression from England, and he said, I mean, I certainly understood the DreamWorks way of doing things, which was, Jeffrey wanted the most direct path, the shortest distance between A and B, and never mind anybody's feelings. Really, you just needed to get good fast, and maybe that kind of DreamWorks approach was kind of running into a slightly more, you know, I don't know, laissez-faire, gentle, English approach, and the two things were not working. Um, anyway, I don't know. Nobody ever explained it to me. I was just told, you're going to England next week to, all right, there you go. It was uh, it was in production. I mean, they had sets built, and they were. I mean, I saw animation. I saw shot animation that had been done that probably shouldn't have been done because the story was nowhere near good, good enough to go into production. So they had, I'm just sort of parachuting into a mess and trying
yep.
to up on, how has it got here and whatever. Um, I couldn't understand why they'd already jumped into building sets and animating scenes when the story was still clearly not working, and that was an expense that seemed to be premature, and you the scenes I remember were beautifully animated, but I didn't understand. It was like, how is this going to fit in the film? Like it was very languid. I remember there was one scene. It was like a long tour of Tortoise's room. The Tortoise was voiced, I think, by Michael Caine. You
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, um, but it was just like, it just the shot went on forever. It was beautifully done. The guy looking at his room and coming to him in the bed sleeping. I was just like, why? You know, why do that? You know, it was nice, but it was like, do you need that shot? Do you need it to be that long? What is this shot doing? There was a lot of that kind of stuff. It felt like there was an assumption that it was all going to work out. And they would just build things the way they always had, and make the film. And DreamWorks folks are much more used to sort of being, you know, the meat grinder of story and working and reworking and kicking the tires and having your ideas torn apart and rebuilt and to try and get to the best possible version of a scene. And you didn't go into production until you had something as robust as possible. This was another reason that Tusker never happened. Even though there were many really good things about Tusker, the story was not ready to go into the production by the time it needed to. And that was the call Jeffrey made was to stop it before it did. Because once you jumped from pre-production, which is a fairly small team, 30, 50 people, to full production, which is hundreds of people, now you're really burning money. And if you haven't got your ducks in a row, and you suddenly realize you've got to do a massive rewrite or something in the middle of that, having that down is really expensive. And on Tusker, I think that it was incredibly painful. I've been working my ass off on that thing for, I don't know how long, 18 months, something like that. So that really hurt when that was shut down. But coming into Tortoise and the Hare, I thought, yeah, this is trouble. And then it was kind of like a race against the clock. It was like, and can we find a way of making this better for the Hammer Falls? And we could not. So we knew. I don't think any of us knew that they were going to cancel it. I think we knew that there was a very good chance that it was going to be, put on pause until it could be made better. And we knew that would be incredibly difficult for people in Bristol. It's not like if you work at Aardman and you're a puppet builder or a costume maker or a prop maker, it's not really like there's an awful lot of other studios who do that kind of thing in the UK, never mind in Bristol. We knew that would be painful, but I don't think any of us actually thought one would be completely cancelled. That was still a very unusual step to take at that time for a film that had clearly had a lot of investment already made in it. But yeah, I remember Cecil Kramer, who's one of the DreamWorks producers, pulling the DreamWorks people into a secret meeting and warning us it's like tomorrow they're going to tell Aardman that they're closing the film down. So we knew, and we had to go in to that meeting without letting anybody know that we knew what that meeting was going to be. It was an awful, awful meeting. I don't think that had ever happened to Aardman at all. So I think they thought it was going to be good news. So everybody's coming into the commissary and it's all sort of jolly banter and we're sitting at the back, waiting for the horrible thing to happen and knowing that all these people are going to be out of work. It was awful. Really, I think of it now and my insides still kind of clench up. Really, really unpleasant situation.
Yeah. And I think, it's a shame that we didn't get to see it because claymation of Tortoise and Hare, the slow movement versus fast, and obviously the story itself would have been really, really cool to see. But I also think I have no way of providing any evidence behind this, but I'm guessing aside from the fact of the story, because around that time, Sinbad had come out. And one of the reasons DreamWorks, at least that's according to the reports, started falling apart from a standpoint of money was because of failure of Sinbad.
Yeah.
It literally tanked. And it had a big impact on their stock market, I think their IPO. But I think if that movie was in pre-production around that same time, I'm wondering if Sinbad had been successful if that had been not canceled. You know what I mean? Like I'm wondering if there's that factor too, because DreamWorks was struggling in the 2002s and 3s or 4s.
I can't. I honestly can't say. All I can say is I think there was enough story in the Tortoise and the Hare story that I saw for a nice half-hour special.
Mm,
Story there for a an 80-minute feature, and it sort of felt like it was being kind of what story there was being kind of
dragged out.
spread out, and
Yeah.
it felt like at the time the kind of the time frame that Aardman was probably most comfortable was that half-hour special. They'd done The Wrong Trousers, which packs a huge amount of story into a fantastic half hour, and and Tortoise and the Hare might have been a good half-hour special. They didn't seem to have enough going on to, there wasn't enough new things to make it. It was, as far as I remember, it was basically a version of the Tortoise and the Hare story with sort of slightly modernized attitudes. But that was,
Mm.
nothing. I don't remember anything that you hadn't expected to see happening, really. And I just, I think that was the reason. There just wasn't enough story there to justify 80 minutes, and whatever development had happened prior to my arrival, it was only confirming that to DreamWorks, which is it's not a movie. There's no movie here, and we weren't able. There was definitely some. I felt resistance, from Aardman to, and we were trying to help. I mean, my memory is that we knew because we were intimately, had intimate knowledge of how it was working directly with Jeffrey and his lack of patience in things getting good in a timely fashion. And there was this sort of slightly lackadaisical attitude, and it was like, you guys are in trouble. You need to step it up. If you don't, something bad happen, and they didn't. My memory is they didn't take the note.
Yeah.
Take it seriously in our efforts to try and convince them to work harder and push harder to try and resolve this stuff. It didn't come as a surprise, but it was still kind of shocking.